Hi, I'm Byron Stephenson.
And I'm Stacie Stephenson, and we own a restaurant called the Shed Market here in Abilene. In the South, it seems like there's a barbecue joint on every corner. For as many establishments that exist, there are just as many theories, methods, and beliefs on how to cook brisket. It's truly a culture in the South. People have very strong opinions on the correct way to do it, and most of them are kind of tied to family traditions or secret recipes, and people want what they know and they want what they grew up with. Just as there are different influences and ways to prepare brisket throughout your state, you'll find many different approaches to it, even here in town. So how Byron prepares his brisket may be different than what you've heard of others doing or what you've seen in town. Barbecue is very subjective. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it, just different methods to create an end product that suits your taste.
And we're going to take you through a few steps on how to smoke your own brisket at home.
So, what we are trying to achieve is about a 1/4 inch layer of fat over the top of the brisket. So, what you're trying to do is when you smoke this thing, you're going to cook it fat side up. So, as that fat acts as a shield to the meat. So, any of these bare spots like this could get a little crusty, maybe a little burned possibly, but what you're going to want to try to prevent is any of that from happening. So we want this thing where there's no points or little pieces like this that's going to get, because something this thin is probably just going to end up being way too dried out and crusty to use. So we need to get rid of all that before we even start. So what we can do is, you always want to start with a good sharp knife. We like to use these boning knives here, and we'll start on top, and we're just going to get rid of that right there. And we can look at this brisket and maybe try to go on the underneath side first. And what we want to do is get rid of all of this silver skin underneath here. All this is pretty much useless. All this will do is cause your seasoning to fall off on this lean side of the brisket, and you just don't want that to happen. So as we trim this, what we want to be left with is nothing but just meat right here. All right, as we continue working here, we're going to try to knock a little bit more of this off, but the next step is going to be the edge of this brisket. The edge of this, there's a lot of fat right here, and this is kind of going to have to be trimmed away after the cooking process is over. So you might as well get rid of it now. So this is really not needed. And you can see that a lot of people would be shocked about how much is trimmed off of a brisket before you even get started cooking. So you get a better idea about the fat layer on top of the brisket as you look right here. This is all the lean, moist on this side. So we want to reduce this down to about a 1/4 inch of trim. And we're going to get to that part. This brisket right here, a lot of people like to use some of these trimmings, the fat and things like that, to make their sausages. A lot of this, you can see we are cutting away some pretty good meat there, but it can definitely be used in sausage making, which is a lot of the Central Texas barbecue places do that. What you're looking for is basically a aerodynamic piece of meat that the smoke will and the heat just kind of flows over, and where you don't get any hot spots off the lean side. Now we want to try to look at this thing and decide what else we need to take off. Any excess fat needs to be trimmed off right now. So that got a little thin, so we'll kind of round off that corner there. So we're going to do the same thing on this side. Try to give you a shot. So what we're going to try to do here, this is the process where you try to reduce this fat down to where you only have a 1/4 inch on top. What you want to do is avoid trying to remove all of this fat. This is what's going to give your brisket a lot of the flavor, tenderness, juiciness. It helps keep the brisket moist throughout the cooking process. So you can now look at the fat layer on top, and you can see the lean brisket there, the layer of fat. It's all just about right. So at this point now, we can go ahead and move over into the seasoning process. So what you're going to try to do when you're seasoning is, again, a lot of people have different ways they like to do it. We prefer salt and pepper only. Just, it's one of those, that's the way my granddad did it. So that's the way we're going to do it. So a lot of people use different rubs and things like that, but we feel like you're cooking a really good piece of meat, you might as well let it stand out. So try to pick out a really coarse black pepper and a coarse kosher salt as well, is what we like to use. And you've got what you have to remember when seasoning a brisket, you've got a really big, thick piece of meat that you're trying to get some flavor from that salt and pepper down to the middle of it. So you just have to realize that when you are seasoning, you need to be pretty liberal with the salt and pepper. So this is what helps give a brisket that amazing bark that you're trying to get. So cover it in salt and black pepper. Black pepper is one of our highest food costs. We go through right around $1,000 a month worth of black pepper here. So we use a lot of it. So what we're going to do is take this thing out there and put it on the smoker. After you get this thing seasoned, what you have to remember is that when you're cooking a brisket, you definitely want to leave it fat side up. My granddad used to, when he first got started, he would put his briskets on fat side down and cook those for about 3 or 4 hours and then flip them and finish them with the fat side up. But we've figured out that we have about as good a results by leaving them fat side up the whole time and wrapping the briskets in a good peach butcher paper. The key to having a good brisket is definitely managing your fire. So the pits that we use are these are, we've got a good bed of coals built up in here. We're ready to put the brisket on. This is all post oak wood from Central Texas that we use. So after you've got your fire built, you got your coals going, you want to try to keep a heat. You want to maintain that heat as close as you can, around 225 to 250 throughout the whole cooking process, which for a lot of people, if you're wanting to eat a brisket at lunch one day, that's going to mean some pretty late nights staying up and managing your fire. So the main thing is you just don't want to let that fire get too hot, and you don't want to let it go out on you either. This brisket here is cooked for about 8 hours, and what we're going to try to do, it's got enough smoke on it, it's got enough bark, everything looks great, it's just got a little bit of time left to finish. So what you want to do is take a little of this peach butcher paper. This is a great product to use. This does not trap the moisture inside the brisket, it allows it to breathe. You don't want to wrap your briskets with foil. Some people do that, but it creates more of a roast flavor. This allows the brisket to breathe, but it keeps it from getting too hot and getting too much of that bark on it. We've wrapped this one. We're going to put it back on and let it smoke for a little while, for another 4 or 5 hours before it's done. So this brisket here is, you can see how much smaller this brisket is from when we first started. So that first original product that we started with that we unwrapped normally shrinks about 50% through the cooking process. This one's ready to go. We can take this inside and start cutting it up. This brisket here is cooked for approximately 12 hours. And what we're going to try to do is go through the cutting. So what the knives that we like to use are a serrated edge carving knife. These things are long enough to get through the whole brisket. They're very sharp. They work great. A lot of your restaurant supplies carry these, and they're the best thing to use. The next best thing I would say would be something like an electric fillet knife or something like that. So when you're looking at this brisket, you can see the grains were running that way, but what we're going to try to do is stay across the grain. So you have to imagine, because of this fat cap on the top of this, you can't really see the grains. So what we're going to want to do, this is going to be the lean side of the brisket. So we're going to cut this, and you can see all that bark. You want to try to leave all that bark intact that you can. And you can see how when we were trimming, we've got that little layer of fat that is rendered down there, and it's perfect on top of it. So as we cut through the brisket, we can get over here to the moist side. This is that thicker end that we were looking at earlier as we were trimming. So at that point, that's when the grains of the brisket change. So you can't keep cutting the brisket this way. At that point, you need to go perpendicular from what you were doing before. And you can see that brisket has got a nice smoke ring on it, very tender. It's falling apart. There's going to be a little bit of fat in there, but for the most part, it is absolutely awesome. This is probably one of the best cuts of the brisket right there. You're trying to achieve that smoke ring, the bark, the juiciness, the tenderness. If you do that, you've definitely smoked brisket like a Texan.